Welcome to Animal Science. This first slideshow will talk a little bit about the history of animal science and some of the basic vocabulary that we'll use throughout the semester. So, we're going to describe the relationship between people and domesticated animals at the local, national, and global level. Some of the objectives of this slideshow include the history, the relationship between people and animals, the use of animal products used by people, the economics of the animal industry at various levels, and some of the major agencies and groups that regulate the animal industry. Some of the resources I use to get some of the information about the history of farming are listed right here if you need to use them. So early civilizations were hunter-gatherers. Okay, they didn't farm, so they didn't have fields or animals necessarily for a long time because they barely could collect enough food for themselves. Once they started domesticating animals and plants, this changed civilization quite a bit. They think it started to happen about 10,000 years ago. One of the first signs of or places of civilization was Jericho. Jericho is a very early city, and they can tell that people lived there and actually cultivated crops because of some of the buildings that were left were used as granaries, and there's barley, wheat, peas, and lentils, or leftovers of those, found in that area. They figured that this area supported between 2,000 and 3,000 people on just the 10 acres. And the key thing about Jericho is there's this giant spring there, and you can see in the picture in this one how it looks like desert everywhere, but right around Jericho there's this giant spring that will produce 10,000 gallons of water a minute. And so they had water. And the people were able to plant and irrigate enough land or enough cropland that they could support 2,000 to 3,000 people. So what happens when food is grown and you don't have to run around and hunt for it and hope you get lucky that day and you find something delicious? Okay, well, one of the first things that happened is that when they had land that could grow some food, and plants were domesticated way ahead of animals, is they started to put fences around it, probably to protect from the animals, but also, this is mine, I grew it, you can't have it. When you're a hunter-gatherer, everybody just kind of runs around and hopes to find a place where there's animals or some berries or some plants that are edible. But once you start to grow it and you put the work in, you want to own it. So up until that point, ownership of land was not something anybody did. Well, now they had to start keeping track of that kind of stuff. Other things happened too. People stay together, and rather than small groups of people running around hunting, the groups could get bigger. And some of the people could stay home and make tools. Some people could make clothes. Some people could be the cooks. Some people could be the people that did the laundry. And so there was started to be separation of duties. And they had time for other activities because one person could get a lot more done if they were well fed and didn't have to go out and hunt it every day. Some other things that happened is there was started to be social structure. Some people were better at things than others. Some people, they started to trade and have money, and so some people owned some things, and then owners had workers underneath, and social stratification started to happen. So until food was grown, there was really not enough food for both people and the animals. But now that you domesticated crops, you could start to grow things that animals would eat as well. Even then, obviously, the people are going to feed themselves before the animals. And a lot of times, animals were fed in the summer when they could scrounge around and get stuff by themselves, but by fall, if they didn't have enough food stored, they killed the animals. Even now, should we feed animals food that we could feed people? That is kind of an ethical question. In the United States, we have plenty of food for our people and for most animals, but that's not true necessarily everywhere else or necessarily worldwide. There's also the issue now, besides feeding people, is feeding animals takes a lot of energy, creates greenhouse gas emissions, requires resources that could otherwise be used to either feed people directly or used that energy used to make people's lives better. So in this infograph, for example, if we traded our beef cows in for a more vegetarian diet, we could supposedly save some cropland, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce nitrogen fertilizer. Certainly we could do all of these things. How much depends on what source you read it from. Alright, so next let's talk about domestication of animals. Early animals were food to people. To early people, animals were simply food. And to some extent, that is still true today. Domesticated animals meant more food because you could grow more of them in a smaller area and make them fatter or bigger. And certainly genetically, we always pick the biggest ones to keep, so the next generation is bigger. So a constant source of food became more the norm. Other things that a domesticated animal might provide a human: work, especially horses, oxen, and even cows. Some cows today are still used to pull equipment. They could be protection. A dog, for example, even now is used as security around your home. The parts of the animals could be used for clothing. Hides of buffalo made teepees, for example. Animals can be domesticated if they are herd animals, eat a variety of foods, have calm temperaments, like comfort, and will breed in captivity. So the early animals that they domesticated fit these things because this made it easier. Okay, you can't probably ever domesticate a bear. They are not particularly social. They don't like each other even. They tend to fight or have, only one or two together at a time, and that's usually only when the mom is nursing babies. They do eat a variety of foods, bears do, but it would be difficult to feed them a diet because you'd have to get all those different foods. They are not calm, okay, but our cows and our pigs and our sheep, if you think about them, all of these things, they fit. They like what we have made their lives better in some ways. It's also important that they are fairly easy to care for. If it takes a lot of work or a lot of time, it's not done on a large scale. This is very true again of bears or lions or tigers. Zoo animals take a lot of individual care, so we don't have tons and tons of zoos, and when we do have a zoo, we don't have tons and tons of one particular animal because it would just be so difficult to take care. Hopefully our animals are also hardy and flexible, and we've done a lot of breeding, for example, to make their legs stronger to walk on concrete, for example. So you can't domesticate just any animal. They have to kind of fit some of these criteria, or all of the criteria. So domesticated animal doesn't mean it's just tamed, because we can tame almost any animal to some degree. But when they're domesticated, it's because we keep them for a purpose, we control their breeding, and they generally depend on us for survival. Some of them, over time, develop traits that are not found in the wild. Okay, so a pig today in the barn might not have the same traits as a wild boar, for example. So, who benefits from domestication? Well, we do, right? We get a steady food supply, sometimes working power, and then there's the idea of companionship. And that varies widely depending on the animal and the person. The animal probably also gets a better life. Most of our domesticated animals have food and water 24/7. They're in climate controlled buildings. We protect them from predators. Do they get something out of being with us? Is it companionship for them too? This is a picture of my dog. I like to think that that dog, her life was better because she had me, just like I think my life was better because I had her. So domestication of animals all began in places where there was water. That is the number one thing you need, not only for people to survive, but animals. And if there wasn't enough water, there wasn't going to be domestication. And if you look across the world, the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze River and Yellow River in China, Sub-Saharan Africa, the South Central Andes, Central Mexico, and the Eastern United States all have pretty good rivers or water sources, and early domestication of plants and animals all happened around those areas. These are some of the animals that we have domesticated, especially the ones we're going to talk about in this class. Can you guess which one of these animals was domesticated first? It's not the picture there. Dogs were domesticated first, and the turkey was the only one domesticated in North America. Anyway, dogs were domesticated first. There's some argument whether the dogs were domesticated because we recruited them to help us hunt, or they started following us around because we're messy and we drop food and don't eat all of the carcass, and maybe these wolves started following us because we were a good source of food, and then eventually they became our pets. Don't know for sure, probably doesn't matter, but since that time we have bred different combinations to create all kinds of breeds of dogs. So the dogs are about 15 to 36,000 years ago. It depends on which source you look at. And after that, the sheep and goats, cows, you can see cats, pigs, all the way up. The turkey, only one here from North America. Ruminants were easier to domesticate because they could just eat grass and follow us along. Okay, because they were able to eat a food source that we didn't even need to necessarily harvest. Okay, and we weren't competing with them for food. It was easy to domesticate them. Pigs probably were domesticated because they could eat our garbage. It's a good way to get rid of just about anything because a pig will eat just about anything. And that was one of the reasons they were historically thought to have worms, and trichinosis was a big problem up until maybe 75, 80 years ago when we figured out that we can't do that. In fact, it's against the law to feed a pig garbage these days unless you cook it first. Horses and cattle were also, like oxen type cattle, were probably domesticated because we could figure out how to make them pull things, and then we could ride them. For example, horses, so they became a transportation source. Most of the domesticated animals started out in the Middle East, where people originated, Eastern Europe, Western Asia, that type of thing, and spread from there. The goat was one of the earliest. We could milk them, they could climb, they could eat pretty poor quality food and turn it into meat. They also figured that goat could easily revert to its wild state. Most of our domesticated animals probably wouldn't survive very long outside of our own barns, given that they're so used to how well we take care of them. Chickens were known to exist in China over 3,400 years ago. Turkeys, again, the only one in North America that was domesticated here. So jumping forward to just a couple hundred years ago, the Middle Ages, 1300, 1400, 1500, life was really, really hard. There was the plague and a lot of other things going on. Animals and people tended to live together. They used them as heat, so there might be just one wall between you and the barn. So people on one side of the wall, animals on the other. Often there was not enough food around to support the animals through the winter, so many were slaughtered in the fall. And they didn't have good ways to keep that meat, so it wasn't quite as valuable if you couldn't keep it. I mean, they salted it and cured it and tried to, but most animals were used as worker. They helped plow the fields and that type of thing. In America, corn, the staple crop, maize, the Aztecs used some different kinds of animals, llamas and alpacas and that type of thing were used fairly commonly. After the Middle Ages, some things really helped animal agriculture. Invention of the plow, for one thing, and obviously they pulled it by horse or oxen, but they could suddenly plant a lot more food. So the animals benefited from this too, because all of a sudden we could grow enough to store. They started figuring out things like crop rotation, how to store food, new sources of power, steam engines, and then later the the gas combustible engine. The climate also got a little warmer in Europe, and they had a mini ice age, and it started receding, so finally the length of the crop season was longer, and so that helped. The Dutch in particular figured out they could leave or grow turnips, and that tended to help restore the soil's fertility, because by this time Europe had been crop farmed for a couple hundred years and the soil was getting pretty bad. Anyway, new things started happening. And then the fossil fuels came in. We started mechanizing farm equipment, the thresher, the cotton gin, tractors, food processing industries. They started to figure out refrigeration, and they could transport food across the country in railroads. This really, really made food available for a lot more people. Farmers could suddenly grow enough to sell, not just support their own family and the neighbor next door once in a while type thing. Crops and livestock moved from land to newly explored lands, because you could still transport food with trains. You didn't have to live next to the farm to get the milk anymore, for example. Okay. Couple of things that kind of made a big splash in agriculture include barbed wire, which wasn't always good, but again, fencing and range wars and who owned land necessitated fences, essentially. Refrigerated rail cars and cream separators really advanced the idea of you don't have to live next to a dairy farm to get milk. And then jump into the 1900s, frozen foods and freezers, and everybody had a refrigerator, really made more food available to more people, and it was safer. All right, a couple of things you should know when it comes to the history of animal agriculture. In 1862, the Land Grant Act, done by President Lincoln, provided public lands for the study of agriculture. Basically, we have to feed all these people, and people were only getting more and more of them, and they figured out that they needed a place where farmers or agriculturists could come learn new techniques about farming. And so every state got a certain place and funding to fund basically an agriculture college. And in Michigan, that of course is Michigan State University. In 1872, the Hatch Act established the experimental stations. So these were research stations. I have one near me in Montcalm County for potato farming. But there's different experiment stations all over, again funded by the federal government. In 1914, the Cooperative Extensive Service was created, and this established like a place people could go and get information about agriculture or planting trees, and from trees to crops to whatever. And under this is when the 4-H was developed, which advanced agriculture learning to kids. That has gone beyond just agriculture now, but it is still out there today. Okay, what's the difference between animal husbandry and animal science? It was originally called the Department of Animal Husbandry, I believe, at Michigan State, and basically they studied how farm animals work. It became more scientific later, and so now it has been changed to animal science. We don't just look at animal breeding and nutrition, but all kinds of different aspects of animal agriculture. Biology is the basic study of life and covers plants and animals. This class is going to focus obviously on animals. It's animal science, but biology covers everything from microbiology to ecology to zoology to botany. Animal science is just part of study in biology. So what do animals give us? Well, some facts here that are kind of cool to know. Mutton, which is meat from sheep, and chevron, meat from goats, are eaten by more people than any other meat worldwide. However, more pork is eaten. Okay, more people eat sheep and goat meat, but pork is the most widely eaten meat, the amount worldwide. Part of that is China eats a lot of pork. Poultry is the #1 meat consumed in the United States. This was not true when I was younger. It was beef, but now more people eat poultry. Certain religions restrict consumption. Hindus do not eat beef. Muslim, Hindu, and Orthodox Jews do not eat pork. Many people eat horse meat, although that's not generally true in the United States. And we get milk from all kinds of things besides just a dairy cow. It depends on where you might be living. Here's a picture of general meat consumption. Most meat consumption has gone up, although if you look at the green one there, which is pork, it has stayed fairly constant over the last 100 years. The light one, the light blue one, is chicken, and that is the one that has really increased. And you can see back in about 2002 or so, poultry overtook beef. Beef has gone down a little, and it is continuing to go down, and one of the reasons is it's just very, very pricey. So besides meats, we also get clothing, shelter, tools, utensils, and personal items from animals. If you really wanted to avoid the use of animals, it would be really hard. Leather from cows, wool from sheep. We used to make tools a lot from the bones of animals. It's not done quite as often anymore, but bone china is still used to make dishes and that type of thing. A lot of the fatty acids and other chemicals from animals are also used in a variety of our products, and I'll show you that a little bit later. We also use animals to power. Even you probably have seen here in Michigan Amish farmers using draft animals to pull their equipment. We've used animals in war, although the last horse cavalry has been retired now from the U.S. military. We do not have any horses left in our own military, but others do. Some animals are an important part of religious ceremonies. Hindus, for example, cows are sacred. We use animals for recreation, particularly horses, when it comes to animal science. And then we have dogs that are both service dogs, therapy dogs, all different kinds of aspects of the companion animal industry, using animals besides just as pets, but also useful to humans. Whoops, sorry, I went too fast here. So, if you have a beef animal, for example, that weighs 1,000 pounds, you're going to get about 640 pounds of meat. So 64% of the animal is edible or used in a meat product. However, 99% of the cow is generally used because we can use some of the other stuff for other things, some inedible objects or for medicine. On top of that, we can use the manure produced by that animal for fertilizer. So using more of the animal makes it actually more sustainable, for example. It is a waste just to throw that away. And slaughter companies and other industries have gotten very good at trying to use every possible aspect of that animal, because it does make it more lucrative for the producer, first of all, but second, it makes more sense. Why throw stuff away that we can use? So in this picture, this is a pig and some of the products we use from that animal to make everything from leather goods, bone china, violin strings. Some of the fatty acids are used in oils, glycerin, linoleum, marshmallows, photographic film, industrial lubricants, all kinds of things you wouldn't necessarily, look at that item and say, oh yeah, a pig was involved in that. We also use pigs a lot for human medicine because the size is very similar and their digestive system is similar. So, we could use kidneys from pigs to give people. And they have talked about that, and probably it's coming sooner than we think. Cows, same way. Cows have leather hides, and that's probably the most common thing used from a cow. It takes about 2 to 3 cow hides to provide enough leather for the seats in a standard family car if you have a leather car. It takes 5 cow guts to string a single tennis racket, and it's the perfect material for that. It has a natural memory that absorbs shock, so it'll come back to the right shape, and it actually reduces tennis elbow because of the absorbing ability of cow gut. If cow is fed a diet of carrots, it turns their guts and the strings orange. I always thought that was kind of interesting. I wonder if they really do that. All right, the last few slides, I'm going to go over some abbreviations and acronyms and agencies that you should know about that we're going to hear about throughout the rest of the semester. Okay, so know what they are, know what they stand for. First one is the United States Department of Agriculture, also called the USDA. The USDA enhances the quality of life for American people by supporting production of agriculture, ensuring safe, affordable, nutritious, and accessible food, caring for agriculture, forests, and rangelands, supporting sound development of rural communities, providing economic opportunities for farm and rural residents, expanding global markets for agriculture and forest products and services, working to reduce hunger in America and throughout the world. This is a huge agency, and everything from food stamps to funding the Cooperative Extensive Service falls under the USDA. A couple of big things that might affect you or affect this class in particular is food safety and inspection, FSIS. This is the group that is going to go into slaughter plants and inspect the meat. All meat sold in a retail store must be inspected. You can't sell uninspected meat to the average consumer. You can slaughter your own at home and eat it, but you cannot sell it without inspection. Marketing and financing is a huge part of the USDA. This funds a lot of the grants that research in animal science is funded by. Okay, so there's lots of good information at the USDA.gov site, and it'll talk all about, or it'll have all kinds of good information if you ever have to write a paper or look up something about production or that type of thing. The Environmental Protection Agency is both loved and hated. It is an agency that was created to make our water, air, land, etc. safe. And unfortunately, we have to follow a lot of rules sometimes, and the regulations can be overwhelming. It is a big issue in animal agriculture because our animals poop, and you got to do something with all that poop. And so it can be used for fertilizer, yes, but you don't want to over fertilize or have that manure run into a water source or pollute the air and somebody has to breathe that in type thing. So the EPA regulates that, particularly air and water safety for animal agriculture falls under the EPA's rules. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration, and a majority of the FDA is going to regulate drugs for people. However, if you want to feed a drug to an animal or give a drug to an animal, the rules are under the FDA. Okay, and there's some argument that the USDA wants to regulate animal antibiotics and drugs use, and the FDA is like, no, this is us. We do drugs, so the rules for farmers or agriculture productionists, they have to follow the FDA rules. In Michigan, we have MDARD, the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. The mission of this institution is to assure the food safety, agriculture, environmental, and economic interests of the people of the state of Michigan are met through service, partnership, and collaboration. They regulate a variety of things in Michigan, somewhat falling under the FDA, EPA, and USDA, but they regulate things including manure application, water complaints about noise, smell, farms. They also have systems set up for national disaster or a state disaster, for example. What do we do if we run out of, if we have a major hurricane, not a hurricane, we wouldn't have a hurricane in Michigan, but if we had a blizzard and a bunch of animals got loose or were, killed, what do we do with them? How do we take care of that kind of thing? Even all the way down to transporting dogs across the border. Falls under the Michigan Department of Agriculture. Under that, we have the MEAP program, MAEAP, the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program. And this is in partnership with MDARD. Basically, a farm can become MEAP certified if they show certain conservation, pollution preventative practices, safe handling of animals, that type of thing. And their goal is to actually MEAP certify every farm in Michigan. And you can see these, every once in a while you see a sign in somebody's yard that says this farm is MEAP certified. Another institution that you may hear of, particularly at Michigan State where animal research is done, is the IACUC. This is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, and basically it's a self-regulating entity that looks at the safety of animal research. If you want to study the effects of some different feeds on different animals, you have to have IACUC checked off, that you are doing it safely and you're not going to be cruel to animals. Sometimes they might even decide that research isn't worth the harm that it caused the animals. Anyway, very interesting institution, and Michigan State works closely with the IACUC because they do animal research. HACCP isn't necessarily something for animal research at all. It was actually developed because of NASA and the space shuttle disaster. It basically is a method of identifying safety issues or things that could go wrong along a pathway. For example, at Herbrick's poultry egg processing plant. The eggs come in and from the barn and are from where they are laid, and they go through a bunch of different steps to be cleaned and cooled and put in boxes to sell or made into liquid egg product, etc. And every point along that path of that egg, from the temperature to were they clean enough, have they been candled to make sure there's nothing wrong inside and they're not cracked, there's a critical control point where somebody checks to make sure everything's right and data is collected so they know that every egg got cleaned, got checked to see if there's any spots or cracks, and it got boxed properly. So it's a management system set up to make sure at every point along the way in a process things are done correctly and safely. And agriculture uses this, like my example with the egg processing plant, but every processing system could use something like this it's their checks and balances. It's a way to make sure everything is done correctly. AIAO is all in, all out. Basically it means, like in this picture of a hog facility, all the pigs come in at the same age. Every pen is populated with the animals. They're allowed to grow to finish weight or till they're done, sent off to be butchered all at one time. And then the whole barn is cleaned. Usually it takes 2 or 3 days to do this, and you want those couple of days to make sure the bleach or the cleaner kills every possible microbe, and then the new set of animals is moved in. This is it increases cleanliness, it stops disease, and it is the way most pork operations and poultry operations are done now, because biosecurity has become such a big deal. To grow enough pigs and chickens for everybody to eat them, you have to grow a lot at one time. And if one animal in that barn gets sick, because they're all so close together and they're all in one barn, disease can spread very rapidly. And all in, all out, the idea is we're not going to contaminate the next group. We're going to stop the disease from moving from location to location. CAFO stands for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. You are an animal feeding operation if you have animals at least 45 days a year in a confined space where there might not be grass or vegetation. So in that previous picture, those animals, those pigs, were in a confined barn all of their lives, so definitely more than 45 days. So an AFO, an animal feeding operation, is any place we keep animals in a pen or in a barn or in a location where they're not walking around and eating, grazing. You're a CAFO if you meet a certain number. So you can click on this link here and it will talk about if there's more than 100 animals, you are a small CAFO. If you're more than 1,000, it depends on the animal. Okay, so it depends on the number of chickens or the number of pigs or the number of cows. And once you hit that CAFO number, small, medium, or large, there's a certain amount of rules that you got to follow. Okay, the small hobby farmer that's got a few pigs and a couple of chickens in his barn or her barn aren't going to have to follow the rules about manure handling that if you had 1,000 pigs in the barn or 5,000 milk dairy cows in an open barn type thing, because you're going to have a lot more manure. So in most ways, the large farms, the large production units, are actually cleaner and way more regulated than the hobby farmer. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this first slideshow. There's lots and lots of interesting things in agriculture, and in particular animal agriculture, so we're going to have a great semester.